Guess it does help if I turn the mic on. Thank you. I'll start once again. Welcome to Fed and State, Federal State Affairs. And for all of you watching online, all those who have access to a computer, you can see all our documents on kansaslegislature.org. That's the main legislature website. You can go to Committees tab, select Standing, select the Senate committees, then select Federal and State Affairs. And for today's testimony or today's info brief, you can go to Committee Testimony, click on the date box, and select today's date. We've also uploaded the committee rules for your review. Those are online as well at the same location. That's under Committee Documents. And for any conferees now or future conferees, you can check out the conferee rules. It gives you some suggestions on how to submit testimony. That's kind of a handy document to have. And again, that's under the Fed and State Affairs website. Also, for committee members, we have a copy of the rules in your packet. We also have the cell phone numbers just for the senators. So if you need to contact with anybody within the committee, you can do that. And if you have any questions, please let me know about that. But we'll only use those just to contact anyone specifically if we have a change of committee agendas at the last minute. Okay, at this point, I'm going to open up for any bill introductions. Do we have any? Yep. Senator Olson?
I think I'm on. Okay, it's RS 0394. It's a bill that I've worked on the last couple of years with John Ney. The bill would increase the maximal total amount of workman compensation for partial and permanent injury claims. I asked the committee to introduce the bill. It'll probably go to a different committee.
Any discussion? Any objections to introduction? Seeing none?
I gave a copy to your assistant with phone number to get a hold of John. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Appreciate it. Sorry about that. Keep forgetting to turn on my microphone. So the bill is introduced. With that, we'll move on to our presentation today from Ed Cross of Cuyahoga, Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Administration. It'll be fine. And Ed's going to give us kind of an overview, but also look at ESG and how that impacts the oil and gas industry. And anybody who's unfamiliar who may be watching online, ESG is environmental, social, and governance rules. And these are sort of arbitrary and capricious rules that are developed by an international organization, but they're being imposed on us through financial firms and financial coercion. And one of the big industries in Kansas is our oil and gas industry, and we want to make sure that we understand how these ESG rules may impact our oil and gas industry and the state. So I'll turn it over to Ed.
There, it's on now. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Edward Cross. I'm president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, and I'm honored to be here today to talk a little bit about the challenges facing the oil and gas industry, and in particular, I'll focus on the ESG issues. But I am going to kind of give a summary of the oil and gas industry, just so that everybody can get an understanding of the impact the industry has here in Kansas and how such rules could negatively impact that. Also, before I get this, I would say that our members account, Cuyahoga members account for 92% of the oil and gas produced in Kansas, and with nearly 3,000 members across the state, we are the lead state national advocate for the Kansas oil and gas industry. Also in the crowd today is Kevin Gregg. He's with the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, right back here. And also representing the American Petroleum Institute, or API, is Matt Hickam, right here. So all of you have a packet of information with lots of information in it, a lot more than I'm going to talk about today, but there's a lot of reference material in there, including our legislative policy agenda, our strategic analysis, the state of the oil and gas industry, mission policy, and more. Let me begin a little bit about the crude oil market dynamics out here to kind of set up what our industry is. While our economies have been recovering over the last couple of years from the worst of the coronavirus, there is significant concerns about high inflation, volatility in energy markets, and U.S. trade and foreign policies. Inflation is a staggering 14% over the last 2 years, and real wages have fallen 4%, and stock market's down 16%. But most destructive for the economy has been the historic federal spending spree. Over the last 2 years, the federal government has added $4.8 trillion in new spending, which the Federal Reserve has said is the main inflation contributor. The cost to heat a home and drive to work and run a business have increased exponentially over the last 2 years. And currently, a record 20 million Americans are behind on their utilities, and 1 in 6 families will receive a disconnect notice from a provider this year. We now beg foreign dictators for oil, while domestic production has still not returned to its 2019 levels, despite oil prices being higher. In 2 short years, we have gone from American energy dominance to American energy despair. So global oil prices, they retreated in late 2022 as energy consumption deteriorated. And analysts project energy consumption to decline with the onset of a business cycle slowdown or recession. So oil market 6 months calendar spread has swung into contango from a backwardation, so that, in other words, future prices now are higher than they are now. The explosive cyclical upswing in both the economy and the oil began after the first wave of the coronavirus and lockdowns in the second quarter of 2020. That peaked in the second quarter. Since then, most indicators have pointed to decelerating economic growth and oil consumption. The federal policies and regulations restricting U.S. production means that there's a lower volume of oil out there, and oil prices, they suggest that that there won't be an oil volume war as we had in 2014 when oil prices, everybody's trying to get to market share because of the current federal policies that's preventing the U.S. from producing more oil. So prices are not likely to fall as far as this time and as they did in 2014. So with just a brief discussion of prices there, I want to talk about who we are in Kansas. The Kansas Independent Oil and Gas, and we call ourselves independents because we produce oil and gas wells. We don't generate or market the end products. We just produce oil and natural gas from the ground. We also produce marginal wells, which the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission defines as wells that make 10 barrels of oil per day or less, or 60,000 cubic feet of gas per day or less. In the United States, the small independents drill 95% of the wells in the United States, and in Kansas, they're responsible for 92% of the oil and 63% of the natural gas. These small businesses in Kansas, we raise our capital through the wellhead. We're not tapping equity markets. It's cash flow that we get from the wells that we drill that we use to drill more wells or get other wells on. Every $1 million of CapEx that independence results in $1.1 million of total taxes generated, along with the creation of 39 jobs. Every $1 million of CapEx for independents results in $2.4 million of direct and $5.1 million of overall contribution to gross domestic product. So in 2022, the Kansas oil and gas industry generated nearly $3.6 billion in output, supporting over 100,000 jobs across the state and $3 billion in family income. It's a very important element of the Kansas economy today and will be critical for the economy going forward. Oil and gas is found in 89 of the 105 counties, and it is always consistently one of the top industries in the state in terms of gross state product. 76% of the value of the Kansas oil and gas industry comes from oil production, 24% from natural gas production. So I said the IOGCC, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, defines a marginal well as making 10 barrels of oil per day or less. In Kansas, the average well makes 2 barrels of oil per day, and the average natural gas is 23,000 cubic feet per day. But yet it's a $3.6 billion industry that supports over 100,000 jobs and $3 billion in family income. Direct employment in the Kansas oil and gas industry is 13,800 folks that are paid $940 million, an average salary of about $60,000 per year. So in areas where oil and gas are found, industry represents a quarter of the jobs in some counties and 60 to 70% of property tax revenue. So last year, in calendar year 2022, we produced 28 million barrels of oil, and that's up 1.9% from 2021. While that may not seem like a lot, that's actually a pretty remarkable figure, considering that there's some 40,000 oil wells out there that on average, on natural decline, would decline 11, 12% annually. So just to stem that decline would take a lot of activity, but last year we actually saw an increase in production of 1.9%. Still, our production in this state is 43% below where it was in 2014. Kansas natural gas production also dropped by 3% in calendar year 2022 as well. So we're seeing production improvements, but it'll be some time before we get back to the levels that we were before COVID. So that also affects tax revenues in the state of Kansas. This year, because of the activity, Kansas is projected to collect about $38.6 million more in oil and gas severance tax and $5 million more in ad valorem tax than they did in 2021. But they still remain 46% below 2014 levels on both severance and ad valorem taxes. So let's look at industry activity. And when you look at that, in 2022, the KCC issued 1,681 permits to drill for oil and gas wells. That's a 30% increase over 2021. Also last year, the industry saw 41 to 60 drilling rigs running each month. And that's a 77% increase over the year 2021. So here's an interesting fact, is that the number of drilling permits issued in Kansas in 2022 is second only to Texas in the nation in the number of drilling permits issued. Now, the kind of wells drilled in Kansas is different than the kind of wells that are drilled in Texas, but it does indicate that there's a lot of activity going on in Kansas. So, so when we look at some of the challenges, let me skip over there and talk about some of the challenges that we have out here, and particularly the ESG issue. So we do have a number of challenges in our industry, and ESG is one of those issues. And I'm going to skip over some of the other challenges, but I'll just briefly mention them. We have a workforce challenge, a labor challenge here, like all industries do in our state, as we have a very difficult time finding the number of workers that we need, as well as the equipment that we also need here in the state. We also have challenges with emissions at the federal level, talking about methane emissions, and I can talk more about that, but my focus today is going to be on ESG issues. We also have a challenge with the lesser prairie chicken listing that we're dealing with, as well as the waters of the U.S. But let me just talk a little bit about ESG. Activists have increasingly set their sights on the financial sector and the legal system, not Congress, for pushing their aggressive climate agenda. So these activists want to use non-legislative ways to impose perceived climate costs and raise the price of energy. And one of the ways they're doing this is under the guise of ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance Guidelines. So employing so-called ESG initiatives, some financial institutions and government agencies espouse policies prioritizing and focus on factors unrelated to a company's bottom line. ESG forces investors and company managers to view company operations through the eyes of a vocal set of stakeholders for whom a company's climate reputation is of equal or greater importance than a company's financial performance. So one of the things that we ran in our industry, we've also see, is that sometimes that spills over to not only financial institutions, but also insurance companies. Insurance companies have long said they'll cover anything at the right price and are increasingly ruling out fossil fuel projects because of climate change. The projects that require large amounts of capital are unlikely to attract investment if they cannot get insurance. So there are a number of insurance companies out there, Allianz, AXA, Axis Capital, have initiated coal exit policies, while Aviva, Hanover, and Munich have started oil and gas exit policies. And by contrast, some insurers, such as Berkshire Hathaway, Star, and Everest, have adopted few or no restrictions on coal, oil, and gas projects. Lloyd's of London announced plans for ending coal coverage 2 years ago, but then declared it optional. So We met, Cuyahoga, we have met with the Kansas Insurance Commissioner and her staff in 2022 to talk about these issues. And Commissioner Schmidt had been to several national meetings where she heard her counterparts from California, Washington, and Oregon and others espouse the virtues of imposing ESG standards. And Commissioner Schmidt wanted to listen to our take on those particular ESG issues, and we gave those to her, and she was very helpful with that. ESG is nothing new for the oil and gas industry. Small independent oil and gas operators are good stewards of the land. We value diverse and talented workforce and put accountability first with every handshake or deal signed. Cuyahoga values the tools that allow for operators to tell their story of fueling the American economy with innovation and hard work, but adamantly oppose tests and efforts designed to put an end to domestic oil and gas production. We believe financial institutes should award financing based on an unbiased, non-political basis. Oil and gas companies are not asking for special treatment, but we're simply asking for financial institutions and insurance companies to be unbiased in their assessments. Some companies in the oil and gas industry have now embarked on an alternative to ESG with what they call long-term value creation, or LVC, reporting. LVC seeks to increase shareholder value by engaging in long-term value creation, including mutually beneficial relationships with trading partners and communities, as well as high ethical standards. ESG says companies should serve stakeholders, an overly broad term that includes committed enemies. That is what, with the ESG, Mr. Chairman. I can stop there. I can talk about some of the other issues too, but at your will. Would you like me to talk other issues? You want me to stop there?
Let me see if the committee has any questions regarding that, the ESG standards.
Mr. Chairman, I do.
Okay, Senator Faust-Godot, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ed Cross, for the presentation. So, two quick questions. So, when you mentioned that some customers will possibly receive disconnect notices, aren't we or the utility companies required to send out a notice before that happens? And my second question is, when you mention ESG and the services, you said that you don't want special treatment. You just want the process to be fair. So currently, what is that process to apply for that funding you're speaking of? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, thank you, Senator. Ed?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. The first one about the disconnects, that was a national figure that you are probably right. I don't know what the utility process is, but they probably indeed do have to send out notices here in Kansas. The figure I was talking about the disconnects were nationally. So I don't know what all they have on all of that, but I'm sure there's some process that they have to follow before they do that. The second question, Senator, was to do the process of ESG. So they're looking at things other than the bottom line of the company whenever it comes to, I think I'm answering the right question, if I can remember.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. So they would look at all kinds of stakeholders and what they think the company should be doing as far as climate goals versus their bottom line. Now, that's not to say that companies will forego all environmental standards. We as an industry believe in high environmental standards and believe that, I think we have proven it over time, we can produce oil and gas and environmental improvements as we've seen emissions go down significantly through the years. I think I got some data in your handouts there that show the exact information as to how much emissions have gone down. So we think that can be done in a way that financial institutions and insurance companies shouldn't be looking at that as a criteria for awarding financing.
I do have a quick question with regard to the small refineries. I know the Biden administration, I'm assuming they're getting pressure with the ESG standards. The RIN numbers for the small refiners, are they still battling not getting the exemption for the ethanol? So they have to produce the higher blend of ethanol, and the capacity creates a problem. Could you explain that?
Yes, and thank you for that. And please know that the refinery is the more downstream part of our industry. It's not really part of Cayuga in the sense that we're with the producers. But I think they're having problems with the RIN issue. And I hesitate, Mr. Chairman, to talk about the refinery issue without talking to them first or letting them tell about it.
All righty. I know that's one of the things that's coming down from the federal government is that they are requiring these higher capacity production of ethanol in the refineries that are not capable of producing that amount. And so they have to go out and they have to buy the RINs from the bigger refineries, which drives up the cost. I do have one other quick question with regard to the demand decline that you're seeing. You know, part of that probably is with the inflation. Do you anticipate that continuing for some time?
Yes, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration's short-term energy outlook that was just released January 10th, I think they have projected that Kansas crude oil prices in 2023 were average $68 a barrel. Today, we're getting $70 a barrel, but last year we averaged nearly $84 a barrel. It's in there exactly what we averaged. So that, you know, we're seeing a declined demand, and we're also seeing an oversupply of crude oil from around the world, which is putting downward pressure on prices. So that's something that, you know, that now the Energy Information Administration comes out with a projection every month. So that changes from time to time. So it's not like the January 10th one is good for the rest of the year, but right now that's what they're projecting, and that's something that we would be concerned with on the price of oil.
Any question, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ed, for the wonderful presentation so far. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. Speaking of ESG and environmental standards, can you kind of give us just an idea of how American environmental standards compare to those around the world and where foreign oil comes from? Because in my experience, American farmers and oil and gas explorers are some of the best conservationists because they're truly caring for the land. Can you give us an idea of the kind of environmental standards that foreign companies do compared to our standards here?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. Indeed, in America, whether it's the oil and gas producers or the farmers, we have the highest environmental standards in the world. You know, that's I was looking through my notes here. I have, you know, how much our emissions have reduced over the years, and I'll find it here in a minute as I'm talking about that. But when we push to trying to get oil from other countries, they don't have near the environmental standards. So it's not like you're trying to protect the global environment whenever you're pushing production to, you know, asking other countries to produce it. They produce it at much lower environmental standards. As a matter of fact, I think the United States leads the world in emission reductions, where you look at some of the other countries that are out there, that they haven't reduced their emissions at all, including many that signed the Paris Climate Accord out there. So, okay, so, just a few years ago, no one could have imagined that we could produce more oil and gas here in the United States and also cut our greenhouse gas emissions, which we have. They're now nearly at 25-year lows. According to the EPA, the U.S. emitted 14% fewer energy-related carbon emissions in 2019 than 2005. Methane emissions are down 14% over that time period. Emissions relative to oil and gas production were down nearly 70% between 2011 and 2019, according to the EPA. And then the Energy Information Administration suggests or show that in 2019, natural gas is responsible for 61% of overall power sector CO2 reductions since 2005, and that's 57% more than the reductions attributable to renewable energy sources. So, global warming is a big challenge, to be sure. But the oil and gas can help solve that, and we've proven over the long term that it's possible to lead in production and environmental stewardship. And that's what I think we can still do today.
Follow up real quick.
So if you were a company pushing ESG standards, would you purchase American oil or foreign oil?
Yeah, that's a, I mean, the ESG standards are what we are applying to American companies, so that makes it more expensive, so I don't want to make a decision on what that would be, but it would appear that would just make American energy production more expensive, and I don't know that it's helping the environment.
Senator Longline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ed, thanks for being here today. Appreciate your presentation. As chair of the Insurance Committee and the Financial Institutions Committee, I'm a little bit concerned about your testimony in that capital markets and insurance markets are drying up directly attributable to ESG standards. It's probably a better discussion we can have offline, but I'd like to learn a lot more about that. I have not, in my discussions with either the department or a number of insurance companies, had anybody tell me that they're dropping coverage or raising rates because of ESG in the state of Kansas. So I'd like to learn some more about that if I could.
And I might address that when I talked to the secretary. That was not happening in Kansas. That was not something they were looking forward. She was just telling me that was a discussion that she had heard from some other states that she was out there. So I'd be glad to talk to you sometime.
I've also heard about that and read about it, but I'm not sure which states are experiencing that. We have online, Senator Holscher has a question. Senator?
Great, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get unmuted there for just a moment. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I appreciate the information that's been shared. I'm just wondering, I'm guessing, is this information being taken to the Utilities Committee? Because a lot of it seems more pertinent there. So obviously every issue has federal implications. But like I said, it just seemed like that might be the more pertinent spot.
Yes, I am presenting in the Senate Utilities Committee Thursday, and it's a more overall oil and gas, not so much focused on ESG. And I did that in House Energy Committee this morning as well.
Yeah, the reason I had Ed come is because we anticipate an ESG bill, and I wanted to have Ed's perspective on that, how it's impacting the Kansas oil and gas industry, kind of to tee that up for the committee so they have this information under their belts as we go forward. Yeah, typically it would be a utilities issue, but it does have an impact here, or will have an impact here in the discussion going forward. I think Senator Kloos and then Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. Could you just speak a little bit, sorry if I'm behind on this, concerning the prairie chicken issue? It seemed like I was reading something that there was maybe some U.S. legislation, some type of a bill that was introduced, and I mean, maybe how that, from a state level, what legislation could do or not do versus federal?
Okay, thank you for the question on that. And yes, lesser prairie chicken is one of the big challenges that we have as well. It's a federal issue. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed the lesser prairie chicken as threatened in Kansas effective January 24th of this year. So they have two segments. They listed it threatened in Kansas, which is part of the northern segment, and in the southern segment it was listed as endangered, which is down in West Texas and eastern New Mexico. As an association, as an industry, we have long advocated that the best scientific and commercial information available demonstrates that the lesser prairie chicken does not meet the Endangered Species Act's definitions of either threatened or endangered. And we're concurrently evaluating those for challenging that listing. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service appears to have violated their own procedures. None of the 5 factors utilized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Endangered Species Act to determine if a species is threatened or endangered are present in the case of the lesser prairie chicken in Kansas. In those 5 factors, there's no overutilization, there's no disease, there's adequate regulatory mechanisms already in place, there's no natural factors, and it has a stable and growing habitat. So there's really no basis for action. U.S. Senator Marshall has a led an ongoing effort to delay the final ruling. The ruling right now is January 24th, wanting to delay that while everybody gets prepared for that. I know there's a number of other legislative congressional review acts to look at whether that is there or not. We're working with our counterparts at the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, as well as the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma and the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance, to look at ways that we might challenge this listing and things going forward. We talked to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with a webinar for our members, and we have some additional webinars coming up next week and after that to look at this a little further. So it's a big issue for us, but it's not just oil and gas. It's agriculture as well as other industries that are impacted, particularly in western Kansas.
So just a brief follow-up then, how does that affect like current drilling or future drilling in particular?
Okay.
Do they just kind of like block off areas if this would go through that you can't? Could you
Okay, they have a certain procedure that goes through that. So you have to go out and evaluate whether there's a lack, an area where there's a breeding of lesser prairie chickens or where they live. They have a certain radius around that. And then they have certain criteria that you have to meet in order to drill in those locations, including mitigation fees. So you would pay into a resource plan that they go out and they offset the acreage you're going to use to drill by purchasing, in this case, 2 to 1. If you're going to drill and it's going to take an acre, you got to get 2 acres set aside some other place that would allow for the bird that has bird habitat. Some would. I'm not a lawyer, but there are lawyers that would tell me that could be considered a taking if you're taking 2 for 1. But anyway, that's something that part of the procedures that you have to do. And then they have certain, you can't be out there before 9 a.m. in the morning, certain times of the year, you can't do that. So a lot of restrictions on all of that and a lot of cost involved in all of that. So, and it's something that the bird population goes up whenever there's precipitation, and it goes down whenever there's a drought. And so that's really what it comes down to more so. And there's predators out there, whether that be hawks or coyotes or what have you, that also prey upon them. So that's something we'll put in our comments to them and be talking about.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming this morning. You loaded us with so much information and papers and so on, and I sure appreciate it. I appreciate your comments on lesser prairie chickens. And my first question, do you have any of that? Have you given us all this information, or is that what you have right there? I'd like to have a copy of some of that information that you shared.
Okay, it should be in your State of the Oil and Gas Industry report in your packet, and I got lots of information in your packet there. So
right.
What I talked about here was pulled from those reports.
Sure, and I sure appreciate it, and I wasn't trying to put you on a spot.
No, that's fine.
Secondly, I do have some concerns, ESCG, and what's going on there, and I appreciate you bringing that forward, and there is some concern. But my question is on the production of oil and gas, and we used to, export oil and gas. So my question is, you probably told us, but I'm just trying to get it straight. My understanding, we are importing oil and gas, and if so, what countries are we importing it from? And other senator here mentioned it. Their standards are a little bit different if you're concerned about the global warming or whatever, and we're buying it from them and still have it here. So that's kind of where my question is. I don't know if you can get the question out of that, but that's my concern. I appreciate an answer.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Indeed, there are places, even whenever we were producing more oil than we are now, that we did import oil from, and there's a number of reasons for that. A good example is California. That they won't let us build pipelines to bring oil there, so they import oil from Saudi Arabia off the west coast of California, for example. Some oil, not all. They produce oil in California as well, but they make up for that with oil from other countries. So, same thing in the Northeast, where the state of New York will not allow pipelines to be built across the state. So a lot of the heating oil and even mostly natural gas in the Northeast part has to come into the Boston Harbor from shipping, and a lot of that is Russian. That comes in. So, so there's a federal level, there's a lot of issues. For example, the Jones Act, which is an act that says in order to move oil and natural gas from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, that ship has to be built in the United States. Just to give you an example of that, it costs about $800 million to build one of those ships here in the United States, but they can build it for $350 to $400 million in South Korea. But we can't take it from, so you'd have to use foreign ships. So if the Jones Act won't let them take oil from Houston or gas from Houston and come around over to Boston with it, unless it was an American-made ship. So that prevents some of that. I mean, those are federal issues that need to address, and there's a lot of people that would be opposed to changing that as well. So. That's not necessarily a Kansas-specific issue, but overall it affects the market that affects us. And so the dynamics of that is, so that we do import oil in different places. That's the best answer I can give you right now, Senator.
Thank you. There's a lot in there, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll let you go ahead and wrap up there, Ed.
Okay. Well, as wrapping up here, I would get back here to the. I'm not going to go through all of the other issues that we have, but whenever I look at what powers the United States today, oil is 36% of that energy consumption, natural gas is 32%, coal is 11%, and wind and solar is 5%. 79% is fossil fuels. And so when you look at what will power the world, not just the U.S., but what will power the world in the future, the Energy Information Administration estimates that by 2045, world energy demand will increase by 23%, and 69% of that demand will be supplied by fossil fuels. 50% of it will be supplied by oil and gas. Renewable sources are projected to grow significantly, providing 10.9% of global energy needs by the year 2045. Renewable energy sources are projected to continue their growth streak, but renewable energy remains too unreliable and expensive to be a primary energy source. So while the ambitious pledges from various international bodies and governments would suggest the energy transition is near, the gap between theory and reality is vast. Fossil fuels supplied 82% of the global energy needs in 2021, and it will likely be decades before an energy transition can take place. And the energy transition may have begun, but there's a very long way to go before fossil fuel dominance is truly challenged. So let me close by just saying that the oil and gas industry shares an energy future vision with the public, and we and our families live and work right here in Kansas, and we care as much as anyone about the needs and concerns of our environment, and we take these issues very seriously. Our mission is to empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. So with that, I would close and answer any further questions if there was.
Any other questions? I do have one real quickly regarding the ESG. Have you had conversations with other states and the oil and gas industry? Are they concerned about access to capital due to ESG?
Absolutely. Many of those are, especially the associations that have a lot of publicly traded companies. They have a real issue with that. So, even some of the companies went back to being private companies instead of public companies. But it's a concern nationwide.
I know that I think it's 90% of the S&P 500 is controlled now by 10 companies or less, and they are pushing these standards, and which would impact the oil and gas industry. So,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ed. I appreciate it very much.
All right, thank you.
That's all we have for today. We do have a bill hearing tomorrow. This is going to be very crucial. It's a state fossil, so we will be flooded by testimony on that tomorrow. And with that, our work for today is done. Thank you, committee.